Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tosh Talks. I'm the host, Tosh Berman. And normally what I do on almost on a daily basis on the show is me talk, you listen. But today we're going to do something slightly different. Change the pace a little bit. I have a special guest here, Paul Knobloch. And Paul translated a series of books for my press, TamTam Books, and I want to discuss translation. And what you translated for me is Boris Vian's Autumn in Peking, which is our first project together. Boris Vian's To Hell with the Ugly.
Great title, by the way. That was your choice.
I'm glad you brought that up. Boris Vian, The Dead All Have the Same Skin. And we should talk about that title because it's interesting how we came to that. And Gainsbourg, The Biography by Gilles Verlant. And Boris Vian's The Red Grass, which is the last project we worked on together, right?
And one missing in action, the Rizzoli.
The Boris Vian's Manual of Saint-Germain-des-Prés.
Right,
It was published by Rizzoli.
So we can safely say that
we've done 6 books.
That your press is the go-to press for Vian in America.
It is, and I think all English-speaking countries.
Good, yeah.
So I'm very proud of that. I want to ask you about the nature of translation. I always, my press is basically all translations, because I was totally obsessed with another culture, which is France, specifically Paris for me. I'm an urban person. And I really am deeply interested in post-war, after World War II, French culture. To me, it seemed to be such an intense time for writers, and music was happening then, films was happening then. And to me, it's a very visual, exciting literary moment for me to focus on. So I spent doing that with TamTam Books, most of my titles. And doing the translations is very tricky because it's, well, first of all, what's your definition of a translation? You being a translator, what does a translation mean to you?
Oh, well, we've talked a bit about this before. But first, I agree with you, that being a really fascinating period, that post-war time, not only in France, but in America, the explosion of culture, it was great. What is being a translator? You asked me a question before about, is it possible to take your voice completely out of the text? And I said, no. What you do as a translator is you try to be as faithful as you can, both to the spirit, and to the literal nature of the text. But you're definitely rewriting the novel. As I've told you, it took me with the Autumn in Peking book. It took me just as long. It took me longer to translate that book than it did to write my first novel. It is.
Why is that?
Well, we've talked about similar things before, and there's no sort of paint by numbers thing. I think that people think that translating a novel is like translating a technical manual or a restaurant menu or something, and it's really not. You're rewriting the entire book, so it's a serious challenge. You know what I mean?
Because you're not only doing words, you're also doing the writer's culture, the world around that writer. Right. You have to take all that in. And plus, whatever period of time that book was written, like say, for us, mostly late 40s, 1950s, you have to sort of up with the 40s and 50s French culture of that time, I think, no?
Yeah. You have to know about that. And I think another thing I've talked about with you in the past is the importance of translators being good writers. I think a lot of people, there are graduate programs in translation, and these people get these degrees, but they never really honed their writing skills. And if you're going to be a literary translator, you'd better work on your own chops as a writer too.
Yes.
And so that's what I thought was a big problem when I was reading a lot of stuff in translation. I thought it was really clunky. And a lot of the times overly concerned with minute faithfulness for every word, right? And so, it's a lot of work. not only the cultural aspect, but sometimes, I've spent 30 minutes just getting a sentence right, and I think the reason you read some translations and think, oh, that's a bad translation, is because the translator doesn't want to spend 30 minutes getting the sentence right. You know what I mean? Yeah, so it's a daunting task. And I haven't been doing translation at all because it's so hard, and I've been working on my other work, but I take it as seriously as I take writing a novel.
Okay, it's very interesting because I chose Autumn in Peking to do for my next, at that time, publication before I met you or knew about you. And it's just by chance that somehow you on your own worked on Autumn in Peking. A lot of times a publisher will go to a translator and say, can you do this in a job situation? But you start working on the translation of Autumn in Peking probably without even thinking about getting it published, right? I mean,
no, I had
you don't know how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, exactly. I dropped out of this PhD program at McGill. I was sick of being an academic. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to live in that world. And I was subletting an apartment in Montreal, and I needed something to do. And I hadn't been happy with some of the Vian translations. I wasn't so happy with Mood Indigo, and I also thought that Vian, a lot of the translations that had been done previously were very English. And I wanted to do a translation that was definitely in the American voice. And I wanted to capture his lyrical style, his rhythmic style, because I think that a lot of times people talk about Vian, they talk about the content, how he's playing around between genres like science fiction, lettrism, existentialism, surrealism, and how wacky and far out he is. And all that is true, but I think the fact that he was such a beautiful prose writer, I mean, that his writing reads so beautifully, I thought that was really lost a lot of the time.
And why, I presuming he's a difficult writer to do a translation on. I mean, his Vian's writing style is very difficult to translate.
Oh, yeah. English. I mean, I can't even believe that I chose this book for my first book to translate. But in a way, it was really good, because when I was done translating this book, I had learned a lot of stuff, not only about my own writing or about prose writing, but about translation, because there's a challenge on every page. We've talked about, for example, that page. What Vian will do is he'll create neologisms, he'll create mixed metaphors, he'll combine idioms. And I talked to you earlier about this one in Autumn in Peking, right? Where he's doing something. He says something like, La moutarde ne faisait pas de viseaux sous ses pieds, which means the mustard wasn't making old bones underneath his feet. And there's no way you can translate that literally, because he's doing two things. The mustard rising to your nose means you're getting angry. The other half of it is old bones beneath your feet, which is mean you're lazy, you're not doing anything. And then he's also mixing these metaphors, but he's also dealing with imagery, vertical imagery at the same time. So when I translated that, I translated it as Dudu's dander wasn't about to take this lying down. Now, is that a faithful translation? Word for word, I cannot say mustard was making old bones beneath his feet. But I still think this is a good translation and a faithful translation, because I'm doing what Vian is doing. I'm mixing the metaphors, I'm mixing the idioms, I'm dealing with the imagery that he's dealing with, right? And that's kind of what we were also talking about, that article about that Korean book, where the author was taken to task for not being literal, which I don't think is a valid argument.
Yeah, she was being. So I can't remember the author or the title of the book, but it's a current title from Korea that seems to be getting a lot of press in the English world. Like people are giving praises for this book, but a certain group of critics have been attacking the translator because they feel the translation is not correct, or
Well, yeah, and the comments that were being made, I felt were petty.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they were saying, for example, well, this shouldn't be wastebasket; it should be trash can.
Mm-hmm.
And a decision like that is not going to obscure either the meaning or the flow of the prose. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? So if I choose, as an English writer, if I choose to say he got to the top of the stairs and was winded, instead of he got to the top of the stairs and he was out of breath.
Right.
One may be more faithful, but I have to think about other things. I have to think about the flow of the prose. I have to think about how I'm transitioning into the next sentence.
Uh-huh.
I have to think about alliteration. I have to think about wordplay.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you're willing to put all of that in the back seat and just translate something word for word, you're doomed, really. I got some grief with this about the Gainsbourg translations.
Mm-hmm.
For example, my decision to translate them with respect to meter and rhyming pattern.
And Serge Gainsbourg, as a lyricist writer, is like Vian, not easy to translate into English by any means.
No.
So you have to deal with those with the issues of Gainsbourg's language and the meanings, the textual meanings of his song, of the subject matter of his songs, or the imagery he brings up.
Right, and that's why I think that phrase traditori, if I'm saying it right, that the translator always betrays the text. It's really not fair. Mm-hmm. We don't have time to go out and learn every language in the world so that we can have the luxury of reading a text in the original, right? Uh-huh. Now, with the Gainsbourg thing, some people loved it. One of the reviewers said this was great to do it this way, but another person just tore me apart. But my argument with that is you cannot separate Gainsbourg's musicality from his lyrics. You know, mm-hmm. It's like Shakespeare. It's a very rhythmically tight thing, and if you want to get a hold of that melody, if you want to get hold of that melodic sense, the rhythm of his prose, you have to do it this way. So that was the decision I made about that.
Most people who criticize translations, as we mentioned, they think like being like a menu translation. Steak, where's the French word for steak? The steak. But it's like, but they don't really pick up on the cultural aspect or the textual aspect of the language.
No.
That's why the most of criticisms I read of translations do criticize it on a very flat level. They don't fully understand the meaning of that author's work or the textual aspect of language.
And if you remember, I was suggesting to you, it's a good point, and I was suggesting to you when we did the Gainsbourg book, I said, I'd feel more comfortable if I had a poet doing the lyrics, right? Mm-hmm. But you sent me some translations, and I thought, good grief, these are awful. So I kind of took the challenge upon myself to do something different. Because, you take something like Le Poinçonneur de Lilas, and I was reading this translation that said, for example, I am the ticket puncher of Lilas, and you can take this metro and get off at Opera, and after that, you'll be walking under a cloud-covered sky. That doesn't sound so great. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so what's going to happen is when you're a translator, you're going to take those slings and arrows for the decisions you made.
And all translators do.
Yeah, I do.
Very controversial.
And I accept it. Mm-hmm. And I've definitely made mistakes. But it's like you said, your point is well taken. This isn't it isn't color by numbers,
No. And I think a lot of people look at not a lot of people, but people who don't fully understand the subject matter or understand literature, look at it as color by numbers. Mm-hmm. It really has a lot of issues involved.
And what do you think that is?
Because I think in a weird way, I think we look at stuff as either black and white, fact, not truth.
Yeah.
Not news is news.
Okay, yeah.
But there's a whole degree of elements involved. How you come to a decision, how you look at something, or how you look at life, or look at that tree out there. Uh-huh. When I see that tree, somebody else will see it in a different way. And I think, and language works that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of language.
And so people need a greater sense of nuance.
But I think a lot of people feel like it's a direct information. I mean, this means this obviously is what it means. It says potatoes, so potatoes are potato, or
right.
Walks like a duck, talks a duck, therefore it is a duck.
Right.
But sometimes, it's like that famous Godard quote where the critic said, "But Godard, you don't really believe in beginning, the middle, and the end." And Godard says, "No, I totally believe that. But sometimes I like to put middle, end, and beginning,
right,
in that order."
Sure.
So that's a translation. Right?
Yeah, well, you can compare this, speaking of Godard's, speaking of the new wave, go back to André Bazin, and you think of the big argument between mise en scène and montage, right? Mm-hmm. And, finally people started saying it's not one or the other, right? Mm-hmm. It's both. And that's what translation is. Yes, you have to pay attention to literal meaning, but you also have to pay attention to poetry, right? Yes. So it's not a one or the other. It's not an either or proposition.
Yeah. So therefore I find a lot of it's really frustrating dealing with that false argument about translation when people are looking at, like, I had a lot of trouble with Foam of the Days, Le Comme du Jour, and that book's been translated 3 times. One by Brian Harper, who I work with on
whose translation I like best, actually.
Foam, I do too. Foam of the Days. And then there's a British one called Froth and the Daydream. Which
that's the Stanley Chapman?
Yes, that's a good title. Mm-hmm. And then there's one with a really bad title, in my opinion, is Mood Indigo.
Yeah, I don't know how they came up with that.
Because it has Duke Ellington imagery, and they just chose that song out of the blue.
Yeah.
And,
well, and I think the introduction of the book is to Duke Ellington, right?
Yeah.
There are only 2 things that are beautiful. The music of Duke Ellington and the music of Duke Ellington in New Orleans, right?
But in that sense, I should just call the book Chloe. Because it's a Duke Ellington song, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's a Duke Ellington song and there's a character named Chloe, and it's mentioned in the book, but they chose Mood Indigo because probably the publisher at Grove Press probably thought, well, that's the most famous Duke Ellington song of the time. It's totally understandable. Mm-hmm. But again, even choosing a title, like a poetic title, Le Comme du Jour, like how would you give it a spot? Translation, if you were going to give that a title, Le Comme du Jour.
You're asking me about titles. That's my weakest. You laughed the other week. That's my weakest strength.
I'm having trouble with my book with the title.
No, I have horrible trouble with the title, and I think it's because I put a lot of pressure on myself. But for example, if you want to pick up that book, The Dead. Not that one. Yeah, let's pick up The Hell with the Ugly.
Because we talked about the title about this book.
And I was struggling with that because what is the title? The title in French is Et on tuera tous les affreux. And that doesn't translate so well. And the ugly shall be slaughtered. But you found this line in your translation, in my translation, and it was perfect. So titles, Foam on the Days, Froth on the Daydream. I couldn't do any better than those 2.
So the original title. If you did like a direct translation of the original title, what is it again?
This one, it means something like "And the ugly shall be slaughtered or killed."
It had like a biblical
and I remember, and it's written in the second person, so it's like a commandment, right?
So I felt as a publisher. An editor, I felt that was like too biblical, too serious for like a pulpy Boris Vian title.
And I think you're completely right.
And I had a trouble with that title because that title does not fit the nature of the book.
No, not at all. But on the other hand, I'm sorry. On the other hand, you take a title like Ottoman Peking, you can't mess with that at all.
No.
Because what he's doing here is he's kind of mocking these bombastic, grandiose titles of the naked and the dead and that kind of stuff. So you've got to. Sometimes you just have to respect it. You know? Which I think is what we did with the other crime book, The Dead All Have the Same Skin. We just took that literally. Yeah,
that's a good title. Vian made good titles.
Yeah.
So, what made you because you write fiction, you write nonfiction and fiction. What made you actually make this huge leap to be a translator. Why did you want to translate? Again, I brought up earlier that you started doing Ottoman Peking not as a paid project.
No.
But you did it out of passion stuff. So what about Ottoman Peking that really made you want to do this book?
Well, I got turned on to Vian in the late 80s by a guy named Bernard Andres, who was a professor at the University of Quebec in Montreal. And he was the first person I ever saw who included in his corpus, in his reading list for 20th century, the review of 20th century lit. You know, because if you're a French student, what they'll do is you need to take these survey classes, right? 18th century lit, 19th century lit, 20th century lit. And he was the first person I ever saw who gave a reading list for his 20th century class that actually included Vian. So I was immediately attracted to that. And Ottoman Peking was the first thing I delved into, and I thought, geez, this is the guy I love.
Because Vian actually deals with classical literature as well.
Right.
There's reference to classical French literature or Greek or
both.
Both, right?
Yeah.
Because Vian was definitely taught in the classics as a student or self-read.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, he went to a very good school. Didn't he go to the École Normale, I think? I mean, he had a very serious education and as an engineer, but he knew the classics very well. And I had to go to work and look on those, you know, to make those footnotes.
This is in our TamTam Books, we do footnotes. Not footnotes, but endnotes.
Yeah.
Because footnotes to me is like an interruption of the narration.
Yeah.
It's like a DVD. It's like a Criterion DVD where you get the extra disc of information and documentaries.
Yeah.
That's how I look. That's how I edit.
Yeah.
Or we did the TamTam book editions. So you also wrote. Well, there's some endnotes from the original French edition, but you added a lot of endnotes to all the books we have worked on.
Yeah, well, I think they were necessary because certain things are untranslatable.
Or cultural information of sorts.
Yeah.
If Vian was bringing up a subject matter or a character, actually based on a real character, like say like Jean-Paul Sartre or somebody of that sort, you need an endnote to explain who that person is, or at least.
Well, yeah, I think it can be very confusing, you know, you know, Vian does these bastardized spellings, right? For example, so I had to translate, for example, pumpernickel, and I had to screw up the spelling completely. And one of the reviewers questioned if I'd made a mistake with that. It's like, no, you know, I'm doing what he's doing, right? I'm giving this sort of farcical rendering of the word, right? Where I think some people, they look at, this guy made a spelling mistake, which really, it isn't that at all. But yeah, you do need endnotes a lot in Vian.
Because he's writing about pop culture of his time and place. So there's a lot of names that come up that would be obvious to a French reader.
Right.
Who lives in France or Paris, but not be obvious to an American English reader because they don't know that character or that writer or where that reference came from.
Oh, even a lot of French people don't understand these obscure references that Vian has. Yeah,
because he's a writer of his times, like the late 40s and 50s, and he dealt with culture as it was happening.
Yeah,
he didn't. You know, all my favorite writers actually kind of thing, but deal with culture in a very fresh, as it happens, moment.
Yeah. So I suppose the reason is, I mean, I was immediately attracted to Vian. He's one of my favorite writers of the 20th century, and he and someone else that I've discussed with you, Stefan Temerson, I like the way they approach this. I like the idea that you can combine really hard-hitting realism with really farcical, nonsensical imagery, right? I like to be, you know, a lot of people can't handle that. A lot of people don't like mixing up those registers within the same book.
They're stupid people.
No, you said that, not me.
They're moronic. They're stupid.
But I mean, I love that, and so not only did I discover him and fall in love with his writing, but like you said, it's a challenge. I wanted to challenge myself.
Okay, so Gainsbourg, the biography, big book. Now this is, we must have been crazy taking this subject matter, because Gainsbourg is a huge subject matter, because you have to deal not only with his life, which is grand and special, but you also have to deal with the entire French music world,
Right.
and the entire French cinema world of the time, and the politics of the world, and the French unions were like, their practices and how they dealt with the music world, and you had to, as a translator, you had to convey this information somehow. We did a lot of editing, or you did a lot of editing from Gilles' original French manuscript, because Gilles was very much of a very detailed, fanatical writer.
That book is encyclopedic. Right?
And this book, if I may say so, is the Serge Gainsbourg source for information.
Yeah.
There's no other book in English you're going to get as much information on Serge Gainsbourg. And in French, this book was the essential biography information.
Exactly.
So as an American, you had to not only translate what Gilles Verlant wrote about Gainsbourg, but you also have to talk about like Jacques Durand or Franz Gall, which are very popular now French entertainers. But there's a lot of obscure French artists who are even obscure in French, who are big with Serge Gainsbourg. So you had to sort of research these people as well.
Well, also I knew his music, and I knew the Vian connection. Right, there was a strong Vian connection, and I was always a huge fan of his music. So for me, it was a real pleasure to discover the things that I didn't know in this book. And it was a tough book to translate, because Gilles writes in the simple present throughout, and then there's reported speech, the interviews, right? And then I've got, on top of that, dealing with translating Gainsbourg's poetry and lyrics. So yeah, it was a big undertaking, and
you had to translate Gilles' voice in the book.
Yeah.
And then you had to translate various voices, because it is like almost oral history here.
It is, yeah.
And then as well as doing the lyrics. So you're doing like 3 different type of translations.
Right.
Styles in one project.
And take, for example, the Liggs McNeil book, Please Kill Me. You wouldn't have to deal with that there. That's all... Right. What you mean, that's all, what is it, oral history, right?
Oral history.
But yeah, you have different registers, and that's not always easy, right? And I thought it was important for me to keep Gilles' text in the simple present, and and then translate the interviews verbatim, right? I think I needed that contrast between the 2 registers, those 2 different voices. But it was a tough task, but nothing was as tough as the lyrics.
So that's the one. I know we talked a lot about you translating the lyrics.
Well, I think, you finally decided, actually, I think I did a couple of samples for you, and you finally said, hey, I like these. So,
for me, it's interesting. I work with you a lot. I work with you the most. I work with Brian, of course, and I work with Robert Greene a little bit. And for me, the translator to me is like, in my point of view, because you have a strong level of music and culture like I do, as well as Gainsbourg did. So that I feel like you're part of that world to me. I feel like you are. You're not Serge Gainsbourg, but you're like a Gainsbourg part of the family in a way. And same way with the Vian.
Right.
And any translator I chose, it had to be somebody very tight with that culture. It can't be this.
I think that's
a job, or it can't be just an academic thing. It has to be like, you're like a method actor to me. You have to like get inside that culture and feel how it's thinking and how it's feeling.
And I think that's an important point. And I think that's why you publish good translations, is because you look for people like that. And I think, I don't know, this is just my intuition, but I think a lot of time when you're reading a text and it just doesn't speak to you at all, is because you're reading a translator who's been chosen as a hired gun, right?
You can read stuff that looks like a hired gun,
right?
Like a hack.
And to your credit, you've always picked great people to work with, and also published really great books. You remind me of, like I said, speaking of Stefan Temerson, you remind me of the Gabor Bocuse Press. You're out there publishing stuff that's really important.
Well, I try to do the best. I try.
And you were very patient with me too, because I was going through a very personally difficult time. Sorry. When I was writing when I was doing the Gainsbourg book, and I really appreciate you
Well,
standing by me and letting me finish this.
It was actually an amazing project. I mean,
Yeah.
because it was like, because Gilles passed away soon after the
Right.
publication. And I remember he wanted to come to the United States with his two sons. And there was also, we had that additional pressure to get this book finished and out before he comes to the United States.
Right.
So we're sort of working on his schedule in a way. And it's,
I'm so glad we were able to do it.
it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
And then we had that lunch with that right-wing politician. Remember?
Yes. The things we do to publish.
But Gilles did a fantastic job on the book. And he's I should say, this is the sweetest guy in the world.
He's amazing.
And yeah, his kids were great. It was great to meet him.
Yeah.
And also, was that around the same time that Marc Lacron came down? No, that was a different time.
That was a different time.
Okay, yeah. We met Marc. But yeah, I mean, I think you've done a great job with the press and with the choices you've made. I know you're kind of backing off translation right now.
Well, I feel like personally with Night Now, I did like a full circle.
Mm-hmm.
And I did all, I Spin Your Graves, did Le Comme de Jour, Foam of the Days. That was like the foundation, the Vian world.
Mm-hmm.
Then Autumn Peking, Hell's Ugly. And I made it like a pyramid in my mind, or a circle. And I started off doing Guy Debord's Considerations on the Assassination of Gérard Lavachi, classic title. And but I ended it with Jacques Mazarine's book,
right? And
Jacques Mazarine is a figure in the first Guy.
No, I see the whole treasure.
So I think of things in a circle, and I finished that circle.
Yeah.
And my next huge project I'm going to announce now to everybody. It's top secret, but I'm going to tell everybody right now what it is. The next big project is, we're out of time, right? Is that, what are you signaling me? We're out of time? We're out of time.
No,
we're out of time. I can't.
No, are we?
Yeah, I can't tell what the project is. But next show, I'll talk about that big, huge TamTam Books project that's going to be earth-shattering.
No, but it's been great talking to you. Keep up the good work.
I'm doing my best, and you do your best. And I read some of your fiction. I read 2 of your novels, and it was exceptionally, really great.
Well, thank you for the plug. I hope we can twist somebody's arm and get it published. But you got to keep on keeping on. It's been a hard 2 years, and I really haven't written much of substance at all. But I'm getting back to it slowly. I've got an idea for a story about a rockabilly serial killer. I'll talk to you about that later.
Gene Vincent or Vince Taylor? Sonny
Fisher.
That's not a fiction. That's a biography.
No, but I kind of like to do it like really dark, kind of like a Derek Raymond type of thing.
Great, yeah.
But no, you're an important publisher. I'm so glad I had the chance to work with you. Like you said, you really remind me of what Temerson did with Gabor Bacchus. Who he was the first person to publish Jarry and Kurt Schwitters and Cano, one of the first persons. I think he was the same guy.
On a consistent basis, I've received so many awards for TamTam Books, and it's like it's not. I mean, I love the praise. I love going to the local market and people saying, oh, there's the publisher of TamTam Books. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I have that problem a lot because I walk around with my copy of Red Grass, and women just swarm me. They can't keep their hands off me when they look at that. And
I understand.
And all the money that we've made too. I don't even know how to spend it.
I know. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tosh Talks. Thanks to Paul Knobloch as a host. A guest. I'm the host. He's a guest, or we're both host guests. And I will see you very shortly. Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, and as my director mentioned, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, because I need to have at least 60 million people. 60 million. What's the population of the United States? 100 million?
About 320. Right?
I'm asking a very small percentage.
Just a quarter of the population.
Quarter of the population. It's so easy to do. Just subscribe. Don't even watch the shows. Just subscribe. Thank you.
Thanks, Tosh. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you.